Yes, please.
Okay. Well, now that we're rolling, I want to again thank you, Owenia. I want to thank President Sibley. I want to thank all the chapter officers and members of the Fort Valley Links for the hospitality. I know this chapter is active, and the contributions that you make to the community are vital. So thank you for being so engaged, and thank you for the opportunity to address you. And just to give you some background, my wife, Alicia, and I were both born and raised in Metro Atlanta. Alicia works as an OBGYN doctor, mostly in labor and delivery at Grady Hospital here in Atlanta. And I run a 30-year-old media company called Insight, which produces investigations of organized crime, political corruption, and war crimes for international news organizations. So to give you an idea of the kind of work that we've done in recent years, we've produced undercover investigations of human trafficking organizations, of murder for hire schemes and contract killers, investigations of corporate abuses, multiple investigations of ISIS war crimes against women and girls in northern Iraq, investigations of atrocities committed by peacekeeping troops in West Africa. And this work is aired by news organizations and TV channels here in the United States and globally in dozens of countries to an audience of hundreds of millions of people. And I'm passionate about that work because I'm passionate about fighting, exposing injustice. I'm passionate about ensuring that those who are being exploited or marginalized or oppressed or abused have a voice. And I think that that is a passion that was instilled in me by some key people in my life and in my development. My mother, who was an immigrant to this country, came to the United States when she was 23 years old, alone as a young woman. She told me every morning to be kind to somebody that day. That was her daily advice as I left the home. That stuck with me. Kindness, I believe, is a value underrepresented in our politics. And then I cut my teeth as a very, very young man working for Congressman John Lewis, who became my mentor for nearly 2 decades. And Congressman Lewis taught me about the beloved community, that we must build a place where we recognize the folly of racism and poverty and violence. And he instilled in me a conviction to fight for justice, as well as a belief informed by his example of the power of ordinary people banding together to fight successfully for justice. And so the work that I do in journalism and my entry into the political arena are grounded in those values, in those mentors and figures in my life. Kindness and justice are missing in our political discourse. And I think what's happening right now in Georgia represents an extraordinary opportunity to recenter those values. I mean, what's happening here is truly historic. First of all, that Georgia is the most competitive battleground state in the country, Owenia. No one would have predicted that 10 years ago. Second of all, we got 2 Senate races in a single state to determine control of the US Senate. And the standard bearers are the young Jewish journalist son of an immigrant, mentored by John Lewis, and a Black preacher who holds Dr. King's pulpit at Ebenezer Church, who pastored John Lewis. That shows you just how far we have come in the American South. But we have so much further yet to go. And this movement that is growing for health and jobs and justice for all people is something that can have a profound impact on American history. If we win these 2 Senate races, we will have the capacity to enact legislation, to govern, to get things done for the people. If we do not win these 2 Senate races, just to be very blunt, Owenia, Mitch McConnell and the Republicans will try to do to Joe and Kamala exactly what they tried to do to President Obama. It will be obstruction at every turn. And there's too much good work to do for people. I was just in Cuthbert a few days back where they lost their hospital in October. We've lost 9 rural hospitals in Georgia in 10 years. 2 million Georgians lack any health insurance at all. Half our counties have no OBGYN doctor. I mentioned that my business has done work investigating war crimes in Iraq, at least until recently, for Black women in Georgia. Maternal mortality was as high as it is for women in Iraq, a country in a state of civil war. There is no excuse for the closure of a hospital in our state in the middle of a pandemic, for the closure of 9 hospitals in 10 years, for allowing 2 million of our own citizens to lack health insurance. I believe that healthcare is a human right. And if elected to the US Senate, we'll work to ensure that every single Georgian has great insurance and the best care in the world, regardless of their wealth, regardless of what zip code they live in, to reopen those hospitals that have closed and to build clinics that will serve every community in our state. I will fight for the kind of investment in infrastructure and job creation that will revitalize communities across our state, create tens of thousands of good paying jobs, raise the minimum wage while we're at it, upgrade our public school facilities, build out rural broadband internet access, where far too many communities now still can't get online, and that impacts business, education, and quality of life for so many Georgians. Make Georgia the #1 producer of clean and renewable energy in the American South, and America the #1 producer of clean and renewable energy in the world. Because in order for us to thrive as a people into this next century, we have to do so sustainably and in balance with our habitat, our one planet. We only get one. And we can make the next 2 years the most productive for civil rights and voting rights in the United States Congress since 1964 and 1965. We can pass a new Civil Rights Act that will establish national standards for the use of force, that will empower the Department of Justice to ensure there's accountability where officers, departments, prosecutors, judges, or facilities of incarceration engage in brutality or profiling or race or class bias. My mother came to this country, and I want to wrap and get to Q&A in just a moment, but I'll just close out with this thought. My mother came to this country as an immigrant, as so many millions of immigrants have, because she believed in the ideas this country stood for. That doesn't mean that she indulged some kind of fantasy about our past. That doesn't mean that she didn't recognize how much further we had to go, but she believed that this country was on a journey toward fully realizing the founding ideals of equality in God's eyes and equal justice under the law. And we can make equal justice a reality in this country, but only if we win these 2 Senate races so that we can enact legislation that will make it so. So I humbly ask for the support of the people, and I ask everybody to get engaged in getting out the vote, because these races are going to be so close. Every vote will count. Thank you for having me, Oenia, and looking forward to the questions.
Oh, definitely. Thank you so much for taking the time to go through that intro and giving us basically the rundown of your platform, just what you're running for and what it means. Now, what I should do, and I apologize, I was a little remiss in the beginning, give a little introduction about the Links Incorporated. The Links Incorporated, we are an international not-for-profit corporation that was established in 1946. Our membership includes that of upwards of 15,000 professional women of color in over 288, well over 288 chapters. Our chapter, the Fort Valley, Georgia chapter, was established in 1969. Now, we are making this platform, and we're so grateful that you accepted to be heard, because yes, we are engaged, and we wish to engage those of our service area and those of the other service areas of our sister chapters for the entire state. However, we are in fact nonpartisan. And please know that we did invite every candidate for the runoff election. So that would be your opponent, incumbent Senator David Perdue, as well as for the race between Senator Kelly Loeffler, as well as her challenger, Reverend Warnock. So out of those, I think scheduling conflicts prevented the participation, but you graciously accepted. So we do appreciate that, and you taking the opportunity and the chance to talk.
Thank you. Glad to be here. Thanks for the opportunity.
A lot of what you said in your opener really touched on a lot of the questions that I had. Can we, well, if you don't mind, something you mentioned just a moment ago about your mother and her immigration to America, and how candid you were just a moment ago, that she just did not basically gravitate toward something that really wasn't true. She understood that America is America, but the opportunity, well, I think I'm paraphrasing, but what I'm getting from that, she realized that the opportunity was here. And with the mantra that she gave you every day, be kind to someone. That sounds like something that could be construed as maybe a value that we should adopt in Georgia. I've been hearing Georgia values. Would you mind sharing with us what Georgia values mean to you? And how is that going to play out over these next 2 years as to how we take Georgia from where we are now to where it sounds in your opener where we should be headed?
Well, the Georgia values that I was raised to believe in are those same values that my mother taught me and that Congressman Lewis taught me, and that families across this state, no matter our political ideology or affiliation, teach our young people. I mean, most people are good people, just trying to go through life, follow the law, build wealth for their families, do right by their kids, do right by their communities. And the values of kindness, empathy, compassion, unity, these aren't empty words. These aren't empty words. These should be the grounding for our endeavors in public policy. We've just had 4 years of fear mongering, hatred, and racism. We deserve better as a people. And we need to reconnect with our common humanity as the basis for our relations with each other as people. We're all human beings. We all have the same basic needs. I mean, the conditions of human flourishing in Fort Valley, across our state, across our country, around the world are not mysterious. Everybody needs healthcare, housing, education without debt, a living wage, equal justice, voting rights. It's not a mystery. I think we need to demystify politics, Oenia, because we've been deliberately confused. But now the fog is lifting, and let's reground ourselves in some basic values: commitment to human rights, a recognition that we know what people need to flourish and thrive, the basic problem that too many lack access to those things. It is too hard in this country for working families to make ends meet. There are far too many Georgians who simply cannot afford healthcare, housing, and education, and not for lack of hard work, but because of injustice and corruption in the political and economic system. We can do better. We can enact policy that helps working people. We can raise the minimum wage. We can expand the Pell Grant program so no Georgian has to take on a penny of debt to get a 4-year degree from an HBCU or a public college. We can make job training programs free so that people can get that commercial driving license, welding certificate, HVAC certification. That's the bridge to a middle class income level if you're making $9 or $12 an hour in service or the gig economy right now. We can pass civil rights and voting rights laws to make equal justice and representation real in this country. Part of any significant infrastructure plan must include an affordable housing component. We can build clinics and hospitals so people can access healthcare. Again, I think, Oenia, that we can unite people by recognizing that the path forward is clear. And it's by loving one another rather than fearing one another that we are going to be able to get these things done.
Thank you. Thank you for that, for sharing your insight into that. Then that allows me to segue over into, because you spoke a lot about social injustice, and your mentor, the late Congressman John Lewis, I'm certain, who dedicated his life, we know, to just social justice, period. Everything probably from the time he was an adolescent all the way until the day he died. He spent time doing that. And your exposure to that, I'm certain, has been shaped and molded in that way. What would you propose, given everything that's transpired in recent months, and what I'm calling recent months, 2020, let's just say that, with the deaths of Ahmaud Arbery and George Floyd, and then the Black Lives Matter protests that have surged? What's your proposal of bridging or repairing the relationships between Black and minorities and law enforcement.
Onia, this is why I think it is so urgent that we pass a new Civil Rights Act in this country. And we should be ambitious. I mean, for starters, we should pass the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, which passed the US House of Representatives, but which is currently being obstructed in the United States Senate. Another great example of why tangibly these elections matter. And everyone who's tuned in and watching this on the stream, don't let anyone persuade you that there aren't real life consequences for every community of these elections. If Republicans didn't control the Senate, the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act would have passed Congress by now. We can pass that legislation, and then we can pass a broader and more ambitious Civil Rights Act that will hold those who are sworn to protect and serve accountable to higher standards. And there is nothing inconsistent with respecting law enforcement and urging that law enforcement be held to the highest standards, because those who are sworn to protect and serve the public must be held to high standards, and only accountability will change behavior. So the last year, I think, has paved the way for, again, what can be the most productive 2 years legislatively for civil rights in America in a generation, since the mid 1960s, in 2 generations. And I think that then, when I reflect on Congressman Lewis's life, and I've got this, I don't know if you can see this, Onia, this cartoon that I keep here. It depicts him bridging the chasm with his body so that people can cross to the polling place. And it's a symbolic of his life's work, but also of his march across the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama, with Hosea Williams and Amelia Boynton and hundreds of others. When they walked down into those billy clubs and police dogs, the images of their suffering, which were broadcast nationwide, the public, the broader public recognition of the reality of Jim Crow, the brutality of Jim Crow. The example of their courage paved the way for passage later that year of the Voting Rights Act. And when we pass a new Civil Rights Act and a new Voting Rights Act in these coming 2 years, we will look back on last summer's events, the peaceful mobilization in the aftermath of the murders of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery, as our generations march across the Edmund Pettus Bridge, a turning point in our history that opened the door for change to protect human rights and secure equal justice.
Thank you. Thank you. Let's talk a little bit about education, public and higher education. Higher education, you may mention just shortly while you were going over your intro about the right to free, well, let's say debt-free, so to speak, education for public school, public colleges and HBCUs, and then with a proposal of an expansion of the Pell Grant. What are your views on student loan debt forgiveness?
We need substantial student loan debt forgiveness. And for the same reason, we must expand the Pell Grant program so that no one has to take on debt to get a degree from a public college or an HBCU. We need to pass significant student loan debt relief, because far too many people are struggling with decades and tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt. And education should be about expanding opportunity and horizon, not saddling young people with several decades of financial hardship. And it's in our country's economic interest to pass significant student loan debt relief, because this is hamstringing a whole generation from buying a home, starting a business, starting a family, causing massive stress. And this is about education, enlightenment, and opportunity. And when I debated David Perdue, he's too much of a coward now to debate me again, but when I debated David Perdue in Savannah about a month and a half ago, and I proposed expanding the Pell Grant program, he denounced it as socialism. Can you imagine that? Pell Grants. Now, what you're going to see, because there's a new administration coming, is that folks on the other side of the aisle who have spent wantonly on giveaways for their donors are suddenly going to rediscover the deficit. There's always money for tax giveaways for wealthy donors. There's always money for bailouts for investment banks. There's always money for war. But then when you propose college affordability, building hospitals and clinics for the people, suddenly the country has no resources. Our resources are not unlimited. We do have to set priorities, and education and healthcare should be at the top of the agenda. So substantial student loan debt relief, expansion of the Pell Grant program. I'm not promising free college for everyone. What I'm promising is debt-free tuition to public colleges and HBCUs. And at the same time, making job training, technical training, vocational training free, so people can get skills to advance in their careers. And in terms of primary education, public education at the local level, we have to rethink the funding formula for public schools, because as long as a community's wealth is the basis for investment in the education of its children, then inequity and inequality will persist. Every young person deserves the same public investment in their education. So we need to stop linking a community's wealth with the resources that are available for its public schools.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, so I think your time probably is running short, because I know you have to get to another obligation more than likely, but will you take the remaining moments, please, and share with us if there's one thing you want to tell every Georgian, basically about you and why it is what you need to serve, to represent us. What would that be?
I guess I'll close with this, Owenia. First of all, gratitude again for the opportunity, and gratitude to your organization and to the links and to your chapter and to everybody who's tuned in for your interest and for your service. I don't promise to always vote the way everybody wants me to. And really, everybody tuned in, you shouldn't trust any candidate who does. What I do promise is that I'll come right back here and sit down with Owenia as your senator and answer questions as I am here as a candidate, and answer for my votes, and welcome and listen to scrutiny and criticism, because that's what you should expect from a public servant, and to approach those conversations with an open heart and an open mind and a willingness to change my mind, because representation is a collaborative process, not an imposition of will. Representation requires listening, requires dialogue. So I look forward, Owenia, to coming back here in just a few weeks when I represent Georgia in the US Senate, to have a discussion about where we go from here. And I'm grateful to you again for the chance to be here today.
We are equally grateful. Thank you so much for making the time, and have a very good evening, sir.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ania. Thank you so much. I appreciate you.
Thank you.
Okay, have a great night.
You too.